What if everything you know about the Middle Ages is wrong? When we hear the term Middle Ages, a certain image immediately comes to mind: dark castles lost in fog, dirty peasants trudging through muddy villages, and superstitious priests warning people of demons lurking in the shadows. It's a period often painted as the Dark Ages, a time of ignorance that stands in stark contrast to the brilliance of modern science and reason. But what if that image, the one reinforced by centuries of books, movies, and simplified history lessons, was almost entirely false? What if the Middle Ages weren't dark at all, but a time of quiet innovation, deep spirituality, and unexpected progress? What if the people we imagine as uneducated and fearful were actually building the foundations of modern universities, hospitals, and even scientific thought? This isn't a story about kings or knights, but about us, about how humanity remembers its own past, and how myths about ignorance have shaped our understanding of what it means to be civilized. Modern culture has often used the Middle Ages as a mirror to measure its own superiority. By calling the past dark, we make the present appear bright. But in doing so, we erase the truth that the people of medieval Europe were thinkers, builders, and dreamers, men and women who looked at the same stars we see today and wondered the same questions about life, death, and the universe. In this documentary, we will uncover the most common myths about the Middle Ages that you probably still believe. Each one will show you that the medieval world was far more sophisticated, complex, and human than the stereotypes suggest. So sit back and question everything you thought you knew, because the Dark Ages might have been a time of light all along. 1. Did medieval people really think the earth was flat? It is perhaps the most famous historical misunderstanding, the belief that during the Middle Ages people thought the earth was flat, and that anyone daring to claim it was round risked being punished by the church. This image has become so embedded in popular culture that it feels unquestionable. School children learn it, movies repeat it, and memes reinforce it. Yet the truth is that medieval scholars, sailors, and clergy were almost universally aware that the earth was spherical. The idea of a round earth had been accepted since antiquity. As early as the 6th century BCE, the ancient Greeks had calculated the planet's circumference with surprising accuracy. Aristotle's writings on astronomy and Ptolemy's Almagest, both widely read in medieval Europe, clearly described a round earth. By the time the first European universities were established in the 12th century, this was considered basic knowledge, not speculation. Medieval students studied works by Boethius and Isidore of Seville, both of whom affirmed the Earth's spherical nature. So how did the flat Earth myth appear? Ironically, it was born not in the Middle Ages, but in the 19th century. Writers such as Washington Irving and John William Draper, eager to promote the triumph of science over religion, began depicting the medieval church as anti-intellectual, suppressing knowledge and persecuting astronomers. This narrative served a purpose. It positioned modern thinkers as heroes of progress who rescued truth from the dark ignorance of the past. But historically, no such suppression existed on this topic. Medieval monks and scholars studied astronomy, used astrolabes to map stars, and even created sophisticated calendars based on celestial motion. Travelers, merchants, and navigators relied on the curvature of the horizon as practical evidence that the earth was not flat. Even Christopher Columbus, centuries later, was not trying to prove that the earth was round. Everyone already knew that, but simply to estimate its size. The flat earth story tells us more about modern arrogance than medieval belief. It reveals our tendency to romanticize ignorance in others so we can feel enlightened ourselves. But the truth is humbling. Those we once mocked for their supposed darkness may have seen the world quite literally more clearly than we do. 2. Were witches really burned in the Middle Ages? The image is seared into our collective imagination. A frightened woman tied to a stake, flames rising, a crowd watching as justice is carried out in the name of religion. For centuries, this vision has symbolized the cruelty and superstition of the Middle Ages. But in reality, this tragedy did not belong to the medieval world. It was the creation of the early modern era. During most of the Middle Ages, the Church did not officially believe in witchcraft as an organized force of evil. In fact, the 10th century Canon Episcopi, a church document, explicitly stated that belief in witches and night-flying spirits was a delusion, warning priests to correct anyone who claimed such things were real. Superstition existed, of course, but witchcraft was considered a pagan fantasy, not a crime against God. The large-scale witch hunts, the kind that led to mass burnings, began in the 15th century and reached their peak between 1550 and 1650, long after the medieval period had ended. These persecutions were fueled not by medieval faith, but by the instability of the Renaissance and Reformation. As Europe fractured along religious lines, paranoia and fear grew. Both Catholic and Protestant authorities sought scapegoats for famine, plague, and misfortune. In this environment, the concept of the witch transformed from a folkloric healer into a demonic servant of the devil. Why do we still associate witch burnings with the Middle Ages? Because it fits a powerful story. It allows us to imagine the past as cruel and irrational, so that our modern world appears humane and enlightened. Yet, ironically, the witch hunts reached their most violent point after the so-called Age of Enlightenment began. The real medieval witches were often midwives, herbalists, and healers, women who possessed generations of knowledge about plants, medicine, and fertility. Their work threatened emerging medical institutions dominated by men. By redefining healing as sorcery, society erased their contributions and reinforced patriarchal control. So when we speak of witch burnings in the Middle Ages, we are not describing history, we are describing a myth built on centuries of fear, politics, and propaganda. The flames we imagine were not medieval at all. They were lit by the dawn of modern Europe. The truth about medieval knights, the reality behind the armor. When most people hear the word knight, a very specific image forms in their minds: a noble warrior in shining armor, mounted on a majestic horse, living by a strict code of honor known as chivalry. Hollywood, literature, and centuries of romantic storytelling have painted the medieval knight as the ultimate symbol of bravery, loyalty, and moral integrity, a hero in a world of chaos. But the real story of medieval knighthood is far more complicated, often darker, and deeply human. Behind the polished armor were men shaped by ambition, politics, and survival in a brutal social order. To understand the true nature of knighthood, we must first look at its origins. Knighthood began not as a noble title, but as a profession of violence. In the early Middle Ages, knights were essentially heavily armed soldiers, mounted warriors serving kings, dukes, or wealthy lords in exchange for land or payment. Their duty was not to protect the weak or defend virtue, but to fight, raid, and enforce the will of those who commanded them. Many knights were mercenaries, loyal not to ideals but to whoever could afford their services. In some cases, they were feared by the very peasants they later claimed to protect. The romantic idea of chivalry, that knights followed a code of honor, emerged much later, largely as an attempt to civilize this warrior class. By the 12th and 13th centuries, the church sought to restrain the chaos caused by constant warfare among nobles. Through councils and religious orders like the Templars and Hospitallers, the church encouraged knights to channel their aggression toward righteous causes such as the Crusades. Chivalric literature, including works like the Song of Roland and the Arthurian legends, further reshaped the image of the knight, transforming brutal enforcers into paragons of virtue. But this transformation was more ideological than practical. The same knights who swore oaths of purity and mercy could also be found looting villages, exploiting serfs, or slaughtering opponents in the name of faith. In reality, knighthood was a complex system that blended power, privilege, and propaganda. Becoming a knight required wealth. Armor, horses, and weapons were extremely expensive. Thus, the title became a marker of social status rather than moral worth. Families sought to secure their sons' positions as knights not for valor, but for influence. Over time, tournaments and jousts replaced real battles as arenas for demonstrating skill and prestige. These spectacles, while glamorous, masked the fact that knighthood had become increasingly detached from its original military purpose. By the 15th century, as gunpowder and professional armies rose, the traditional knight was already becoming obsolete, yet the myth of the noble knight only grew stronger. Still, we must not dismiss the ideal of chivalry entirely. While often hypocritical in practice, the concept did shape European culture profoundly. It inspired a growing respect for loyalty, justice, and personal honor. It encouraged knights and later rulers to see themselves as guardians of order rather than instruments of chaos. In this sense, the chivalric code laid the groundwork for later notions of ethics and civic responsibility in Western society. However, beneath that veneer of virtue, the everyday reality of knighthood remained grounded in violence and control. Knights were often the arm of the feudal system, enforcing taxes and punishing rebellion. They represented authority in an age where the common man had little voice. Many lived not by ideals, but by fear, fearing poverty, dishonor, or death on the battlefield. In their private letters, some knights confessed doubts and guilt about their actions during wars and crusades, revealing that even they struggled to live up to the legends created around them. The legend of the knight survived long after the institution itself faded. By the Renaissance, armor became ceremonial, worn in parades rather than in battle. Writers like Sir Thomas Malory and poets of later centuries transformed these soldiers into timeless archetypes, symbols of courage, love, and moral purity. Modern culture inherited that romantic version, turning it into fairy tales, video games, and Hollywood epics. But behind the myth lies the truth of human nature, that even the most shining armor cannot conceal the contradictions of those who wear it. So the next time you imagine a knight kneeling before a king or riding toward a dragon, remember this: their greatest battles were not fought on open fields, but within themselves, between duty and desire, between faith and fear, between the man they were and the legend they became. The secrets of medieval medicine: how people healed without modern science. Have you ever wondered how people survived a world without antibiotics, anesthesia, or even basic hygiene? Imagine being in a dimly lit hut in the year 1350, the air thick with the scent of herbs and burning candles, and the local healer mixing a potion made of crushed worms, honey, and wine. It sounds primitive, even horrifying, yet for millions of people, this was the only hope of recovery. In an age when disease was seen as divine punishment and the human body was a mystery, medicine was not a science, it was a blend of faith, superstition, and fragments of ancient wisdom. But surprisingly, not all of it was nonsense. Beneath the odd rituals and strange concoctions, medieval medicine hid a remarkable understanding of nature, one that quietly laid the foundations of modern healing. At the heart of medieval medical thought was the theory of the four humors, a concept inherited from ancient Greece. According to this theory, the human body was ruled by four substances: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and health depended on keeping them in balance. Illness, therefore, meant imbalance, and the cure was to restore harmony. This belief shaped nearly every treatment in medieval Europe, from bloodletting to purging to the use of hot and cold foods. Physicians like Galen and Hippocrates were seen almost as prophets, their writings copied and preserved in monasteries. Yet, the more we study their influence, the clearer it becomes: the Middle Ages weren't as ignorant as we imagine. Though their logic was flawed, their methods often worked not because of the humors, but because their remedies were rooted in careful observation of nature and human behavior. Herbal medicine was the cornerstone of everyday healing. From lavender and sage to garlic and nettle, plants were both food and pharmacy. Monks, who preserved much of the classical knowledge, cultivated medicinal gardens called physic gardens, where every herb had a purpose. For example, willow bark, known to relieve pain, contained salicin, the same compound later used to develop aspirin. Honey, widely used to treat wounds, has antibacterial properties that modern science now confirms. Medieval healers also relied on astrology, believing that the position of the stars influenced a person's health. While this may sound superstitious, it reflects an early attempt to connect the human body with the larger cosmos, a poetic, if unscientific, understanding of life's interconnectedness. In the end, medieval medicine was a paradox, deeply flawed yet strangely insightful, brutal yet compassionate. It was a world where faith met experimentation, and where healing was as much about hope as it was about herbs. Next time you take an aspirin or apply honey to a wound, remember, you're using remedies that medieval people trusted long before science gave them a name. Their world may seem distant, but their struggle to survive, to heal, to make sense of pain is timeless. If you found this journey through medieval medicine fascinating, don't forget to subscribe and join me again as we uncover more secrets from the past, stories that show just how much we owe to the people who healed before science.